No more Shama.
What's up, ladies and gents? It's your boy Jermaine Event, main on MMA, and today, ladies and gents, we are checking out this video from VampiricLegz, and the title is "The UFC Doesn't Have a Star Problem," which has been I say for the past 2-3 years, it's been like, when is that next big star gonna happen? And now with the wrestling heavy style of the current champions, of most of the current champions, people hate it. They hate wrestling. They hate mixed martial arts. I don't know why they even watch this sport. But since they do waste our time by watching this sport, they think there's a star problem. And let's see what VampiricLegz has to say, because he's saying that they don't have a star problem. So I'm very interested in hearing this argument. Let's dive on into that, ladies and gents.
The UFC doesn't have a star problem. The situation is far more complicated than a lot of people in the MMA space are saying. So why don't we have any stars is the wrong question. The question we really need to be asking ourselves is, why aren't our current stars enough?
Yeah.
A lot of people in this current star power debate are looking for the UFC to have another McGregor. That's not going to happen. That's not feasible on a short time frame. You cannot compare the UFC now to the UFC in 2015, 2016. We're closing in on a decade from the McGregor era. We need to kind of start leaving that in the past and not expecting that to be our future. Even comparing the stars of today to the stars of the 2000s, I personally think we're better off now. There have been no real long-term stars, even from that era, even from other eras, the 90s, into the 2000s, into the 2010s. There have been no long-term stars. Brock Lesnar had 7 fights in his initial run, 8 fights in total. This was over the span of like 4 years, and then it was over. But he was the biggest star at the time. Now, do we think Alex Pereira right now, or pre-Magomed Ankalaev loss, is bigger than Brock Lesnar? It's hard to know for sure because the metrics have shifted, right? Brock was for sure a better pay-per-view star, but everything's skewed because nobody buys pay-per-views anymore. So of course Alex Pereira's pay-per-view buys compared to Brock are going to be worse, but based on social media presence and capturing the zeitgeist, you could maybe argue he's bigger than Brock was. But even having a star on the level of a Brock or a Pereira isn't enough for some of these people. They want a star. They want a star with mass crossover appeal. And I don't think that that's what's going to save the UFC. If anything is going to save the UFC, it's going to be systematic changes and shifting monetary structures. Those are far more likely to help the UFC in the long run, because the average star only lasts 6-ish good years at the most. One of the issues we're running into right now is that talent doesn't equal star power. The UFC has an abundance of talent. Many fighters are almost the greatest of all time in their division. There's some fighters who are top 3 in their divisions all time. You know, like there's a lot of people circling that list. But it just doesn't feel like they're breaking through in the way that others have broken through. Ilia Topuria, I'm sure he's big in Spain, he's big in Georgia. But the numbers so far aren't looking absolutely phenomenal for him. And like we established earlier with Pereira, that's not entirely his fault. But he's just not becoming mainstream like a McGregor. And people got kind of complacent with the McGregor era, and they thought that that was going to be the norm, that, oh, every 5 years we're going to have a big McGregor star. No, that was like the stars aligning, Mercury in retrograde, the whole deal for McGregor. And regarding the whole star power debate, there's an element of, and I don't mean to say this to degrade these people, but they aren't looking hard enough. MMA, maybe even more than any other sport, is built off of storylines and answering questions. It's something that I bring up a lot because I'm a firm believer in it. Can this guy defend the wrestling? How good is this guy striking? Can this guy come back from an injury? That should be what the media is mostly based on, as well as what fighters should strive to accomplish. By the end of GSP or Mighty Mouse's careers, you knew exactly what they brought to the table. If somebody asked you to describe their fight style, you could probably do it in great detail. And you knew what their weak spots were. And you knew how they looked up a weight class. That's kind of the main knock against Khabib, right? Is that he wasn't there long enough to answer some of those long-term questions. How would he hold up when he has to fight the next generation of guys like an Arman Tsarukyan? How would he do up at welterweight against Usman? Right, he didn't answer those long-term questions in the way that a GSP or a Mighty Mouse, or even to a degree John Jones has. That's a very long-winded way of me saying that there are practically infinite things to talk about. But making up and exaggerating problems that don't really exist is a bit lazy, in my opinion. And I'm not trying to throw stones in a glass house here. I am guilty of this too. Blank is overrated. Blank is a failure, right? Negativity sells. Whipping people up into a frenzy sells. But the star power discussion, in my opinion, is a little bit beyond that because it is untrue and it's not really getting to the roots of the issue. The UFC and MMA aren't declining. Maybe the growth is slowing down a little bit, but every other league in the world has plateaued at this point. MLB, MLS, NFL, NHL, everything, you're seeing all the metrics even off right about now. The UFC, even though the growth isn't as extreme as 2016, 2018, it's still growing more than every other sport right now. A bigger issue than the star power issue is a talent issue. Not at the top level, but kind of in the mid tiers, okay? The B level, C level fighters. There's a talent issue there. We have a lot of phenomenal guys at the top, but the mid-ranked guys leave a lot to be desired. The UFC would rather bring in an untested fighter at 10-10, just sign a guy off the Contender Series, instead of renewing a guy with a couple of losses at 30-30. This, at times, has watered down some of the cards, taking away those C-tier fighters that prospects need to beat to grow. But the UFC wants stars, so they are willing to kill off a few guys that could be top 15 guys, eventually, given a little bit of time. They're never going to be that upper echelon, but they had potential to be solid. Edmund Shabazian comes to mind. He could have been a decent ranked fighter, but because he was from the Ronda Rousey camp, he was forced into sink or swim matchups far too early, and now he's just another warm body. So hopefully, the UFC keeps him around as a C+ player to test some prospects. But if Shabazian in the next year goes on a 3-fight losing streak, they're just going to cut him. They don't have time for that. They can fill his spot on any fight night with 2 10-10 guys for half of his price. The UFC has always been about having an ensemble cast, like The Office. Steve Carell is a great leading man, but if he was surrounded by talentless hacks, the show wouldn't be nearly as popular. The McGregor era, as great as it was, had some other key players. Cody Garbrandt's rise, early Stipe, Robbie Lawler, Rory McDonald happened in there. Bisping, finally getting the belt, Cormier, Jones, a little bit of that was happening around the same time. That was his supporting cast that helped to make that era great. And then there's been a lot of people who are saying that right now, the UFC is doomed, the UFC has declined. We have a bunch of boring champions. Man, that's just silly. Pantoja, Merab, and Bilal, those are the 3 that people really look at, put under the microscope.
I don't know why.
For sure, they aren't finishers, and they're probably the least entertaining champs. Maybe you can make that argument. But to say that they're boring 100% of the time is a bit absurd. Pantoja against Royval, Urseg, Moreno, Asakura were all fun fights. Merab has the greatest cardio of all time and he employs it with a level of activity that you at least have to respect. Bilal maybe has less redeeming qualities than the other 2, but him versus Leon was fun. Star power makes people show up, but it doesn't make them spend money. The pay-per-view model is dead in the water right now. And it's not a one-for-one comparison, but the WWE on Netflix has been killing it lately. Netflix doesn't release numbers frequently or consistently, but all signs are pointing to the WWE being able to...
Wrestling rings do look like NASCAR now. I didn't know they did that. I haven't watched wrestling since really like back in the day. Well, I tried back maybe 10 years ago, but anywho. But yeah, I didn't know the ring looked like that now. I was watching Ariel Helwani talk about how they should let the fighters wear their wear the fight shorts they want to wear. And they were like, they don't want it to look like NASCAR. He was like, the octagon looks like NASCAR. The wrestling ring looks like NASCAR. And I was like, no, it doesn't. It's white. But nah, looks like, is that Snickers? They got Snickers. They got all kinds of stuff all over that mat. Intuit.
Recapture lapsed fans and bring in some casuals because Netflix is on every device you could ever imagine. Pretty soon they're going to start putting it on toasters. You can watch Riverdale while smelling burnt toast. Granted, if you're watching Riverdale, you probably smell burnt toast pretty frequently anyways. Even if pay-per-views were only a part of the highest tier of Netflix, that's $20 for pay-per-views and fight nights, off of a service that has even more value to offer. There was a report that came out from a very unreputable source. I don't think that they have insider information, but I do think that their shot in the dark landed. The UFC's pay-per-view numbers are probably down, as all the old people who don't understand pirating die off. Sorry, it's a bit morbid, but it's reality, right? They're going to continue to drop. ESPN does not like this, but the UFC doesn't like ESPN either because their broadcasts are shit. So they look to be parting ways with each other, and the UFC is willing to cut off an arm and a leg to get onto Netflix. Media rights is the big game of the last decade.
So are they
or
just
so.
going to do away
After
with
the Barbie
pay-per-views?
movie came out, one of the biggest talking points was, when is it coming to streaming and who's going to have it? I'm assuming that companies were willing to pay hand over fist to have that movie viewable on their platform. We're getting to a point where your media doesn't even have to be heavily watched or entertaining or good or whatever. As long as you can swindle business execs into thinking it is, congratulations, you win $1 bajillion. The UFC doesn't have a star problem, they have a consistency problem caused by AV issues and bad business practices. It's a star-driven sport. Oh, was that what Tough was about? Pay-per-view numbers from back in the day aren't saying that Griffin or Bonner were huge needle movers. The UFC currently doesn't have another McGregor on standby, but they have a lot of fighters on the periphery of being moderate stars. And these fighters could, as a team, build the UFC up over the next 5 years. Let me know what you think about the UFC's star problem in the comment section below. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Nah, rocks with VampiricLegz. Get that boy a like. I agree, man. It's not. I don't think we have a star problem. It's me. If I'm a fan of this sport, I'm watching the sport, right? I think it is a problem that they get rid of a lot of those mid-tier guys. Because a lot of those guys could turn into crafty veterans that go on runs later on, but they should definitely be there to test those 10 and 10 guys, those young guys who, honestly, the UFC today has a lot of people that they'll put on the Contender Series. Some of the people, if they want, they'll be like, they're not ready. Come back for another Contender Series. Like, go back on the regional scene, win some fights. They don't have enough. But still, we'll still get fights where there's like a person who's only had 5 fights versus someone who's only had 6 fights on the UFC level. All right. When I say to people, dude, I watch every fight. I go to the show and I watch every fight. But if I convince them to do that, like when the UFC came to Milwaukee last, I can't tell you who most of the people who fought early on that card were. I think most of those people aren't in the UFC anymore. Like a lot of heavyweights that aren't in the UFC anymore. I think his name's like Juan Adams or some shit. I don't know. Anywho. My point being is, the top to bottom isn't the best of the best. You can potentially get the best at the later parts of the card, but for the most part, people don't want to see the best. This is my point. They don't want to see the best because they don't know what the best is. They hate grappling, but this is mixed martial arts. There are stars, in my opinion. I think Dricus is a star right now. I think he's gotten the rub. I think Merab is a star. I think we have some stars. If we're talking about, I think Islam Makhachev, definitely a star. Definitely a star. Bilal, that's my dude. I think he's on his way. All right. I think he's on his way to superstardom if he beats Jack Della. He was ready to take on Shavkat. People were really into that. I think we have some stars here. I fucks with Ilya. All right. I think Ilya is huge in other parts of the world. It doesn't have to be America for him to be a star. He's a star. Spain. He's always hanging out with these, I'd imagine, soccer players. I don't know these people. But he's always hanging out with these people. That guy, what's his name? Is it Ronaldo or something? I think the guy who, he's got like that greasy black hair and like he's like way too tan. It's weird. Way too tan. It's like some Donald Trump shit. But anywho, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Does the UFC have a star making problem? Does it have a star problem? I think it doesn't. I think for the most part, people just don't know what they are watching. But head on over to VampiricLegz, give them a like, give them a subscribe, and tell them I sent you. All right? Tell them you're a part of the Jermaine event, Main on MMA Nation, ladies and gents. You're a part of Mama, Main on MMA. Tell them Mama sent you. All right? Tell them Mama sent you. But thank you guys for being here once again. As always, hit that like, hit that subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.
Featherweight, I'm more Francis Ngannou. I be the biggest problem out of any nigga I know. A little old school, like some 45 vinyls. You niggas old duels, what that do to the wino? I do it the commercial way, pay without the splits.